Acknowledging the strength that had been forged within him, Jules rises with an unbreakable determination that was fueled entirely by himself. Knowing that the shadow and guilt of his past weighed on him too much to continue neglecting, his sights are set on the dreary grounds that he had fled from all those months ago. Unsure of what awaited him, but confident he would be able to overcome it, Jules prepares for several days away from his home, as he makes the commitment not to return until his mission is seen through. Pulling out onto the main road as the foggy morning drapes around him, Jules stares down the blurry street and cherishes the addictive sensation of finally being proactive. Knowing he'll need the entire route clear for his plans, Jules doesn't spare any of the shambling husks occupying the pavement as he scatters their rotten souls across the ground. Realizing just how effective he had become at dishing out death, the hardened and tested survivor doesn't recognize the sniveling weakling that had crawled through these very woods before. Growing closer to the main entrance as the morning fog clears, Jules begins to squint at the disfigured faces of the infected, starting the unpleasant process of finding his lost companions. Discerning that there were far fewer undead than when he had last probed the country club, Jules fears that his targets might have migrated during his lengthy absence, but still pushes towards the main building with precarious hope. Struggling with the quiet as he pulls in front of the building that held a mountain of painful memories, Jules tries his best to suppress the haunting echoes that roll out of the shattered windows and across the overgrown lawn. Delight, horror, and disgust all grip Jules in an instant as the first familiar face shambles from the dark hallway. Though half her features were ripped and torn, Jules recognizes the empty shell of Kathy Martin as the monster inside wills her ever forward. Finally freeing her from the torment she endured, Jules feels the beginnings of relief working towards his soul, though the immediate pain and heartache was undeniable as he loads her in his truck. Beginning to clear out what remained of the horde inside, Jules wouldn't be satisfied until he found Kathy's husband Greg and Marcus, the man that Jules could never repay. Finding the building worryingly empty, Jules feels his perseverance being tested, but all it did was expose the iron will he had discovered within himself. Sleeping in the staff room to avoid having to face the bedrooms the group had occupied, Jules finally clears the rest of the large structure as winter's brutal chill drifts through the corridors. Stumbling across Marcus's truck in the parking lot behind the building, Jules briefly sits inside and is faced with the stubborn scent of the heroic outdoorsman. Finally aiming his search outside into the surrounding buildings, Jules spots a corpse being reclaimed by the earth before a sliver of recognition comes from the now faded and bloody clothing. Staring down at the now rotting face of the man who had saved his life, Jules focuses in on the obvious bullet hole located clearly on his sunken forehead. Wondering if this had been the work of Kevin, as the now weary survivor scans across the dim landscape, Jules eventually accepts that another one of his goals had been found and starts wrenching the fragile corpse free from the frozen earth. Loading Marcus into the back of his truck and thankful of the freezing temperature for once, Jules doesn't give up his hunt as his last companion remains lost. Discovering another dispatched creature heading away from the building, Jules is confident that he wasn't the first to return here, but judges by the state of the bodies that Kevin had been long gone. Growing tired of searching on foot, Jules settles into the seat of his truck before happening upon a small pocket of the patient dead. While clearing the gathering along the road, Jules' dull eyes scan over a pale face and a denim jacket that he knew all too well, identifying the final companion he had failed and come to rescue. With the entirety of his guilt loaded into the back of his vehicle, Jules begins to hunt through the conversations with Mr. and Mrs. Martin, trying his best to recall any details they had brought up about their home. They had mentioned that it wasn't far and was somewhere north of Ekron, but those two facts did little to narrow down the tedious search Jules now faced. Having reached Ekron proper, and realizing that he must have missed their isolated farm, Jules lights up momentarily as he spots a bookstore silently waiting along the road. Searching over the many abundant shelves, Jules' gaze flicks over a manual that he'd all but forgotten about until the title burned into his mind. Excited to see his power return once he made it back to Little Hope, Jules doesn't lose focus on the task at hand as he mounts back up and continues his desperate exploration. Growing frustrated as he backtracks to the road he'd neglected due to the wandering horde, Jules suspects that this had been his destination all along, before slipping his pistol from his holster and venting his agitation. Smiling as he spots the overgrown home through a cracked windshield, Jules grows confident he had finally found the Martins' residence before making his way inside to confirm. Knowing his assumption was correct, as he discovers a polished pair of boots in the closet, Jules thinks back to the many times Greg grumbled about leaving his cherished footwear behind. Tired and content as he grew closer and closer to putting his demons to rest, Jules tucks himself away in what he assumed was their daughter's room, and idly wonders what her fate had been within Louisville. Etching their names into the rudimentary crosses he had constructed, and honoring their memory with Greg's boots and Kathy's favorite cookbook, Jules takes a long and final look over the resting place of those he had failed. Freeing a friendly-looking gnome from a thicket of overgrown bushes, Jules spends the final hours of the morning claiming a few pieces of furniture before departing the Martins' farm once and for all. Spurring his dutiful truck back in the direction of Little Hope, Jules can't help but wonder what the Martins would think of him at this point. Would they be disappointed? Grateful? Understanding? Or perhaps, much like Jules, they wouldn't recognize the rugged and bloodied creature that the frail librarian had become. Growing closer and closer to his hilltop sanctuary, Jules' thoughts shifted to the last of his charges, still waiting in the back of his truck. Marcus was the one he had let down the most, the man that Jules owed everything to, but had no way of repaying. Briefly, Jules tries to convince himself that the former groundskeeper would be rightfully bitter and resentful towards him, but in all reality, Jules knew that Marcus's enormous heart wouldn't fathom it. In all likelihood, he probably would be proud of how far Jules had come, though the horrors and deeds that he'd been forced to do might have changed Marcus's final decision. Finally completing the task he had set out to do, Jules gazes over the quiet grave of Marcus as he silently begs for the man's forgiveness. If only Jules had possessed the courage he now knew, then Marcus wouldn't be blanketed in soil and snow. Partially freed from the weight of his guilt as Jules refocuses himself on survival, he finally is able to feed the empty generator behind his building before hearing the delightful rumble of the machine.
This is an automated broadcast from a new Necedah refuge to all living souls within range. We have established a secure community with food, water, and electricity located southwest of Pentwell Lake, Minnesota. If you cannot reach us by your own means, broadcast on this frequency and alert us of your location. We are well supplied and willing to provide evac and transportation. This message will repeat at 600 hours, 1200 hours, and 1800 hours. Stay safe. You are not alone.